Chapter 24. Winter passed, quiet as slumber. The castle cocooned beneath the gentle layer of snow, obscuring the transformation within. Not only did Zelda transform the sullen dining hall into an elegant showcase of the land's bounty with towering windows and an expansive terrace, but the entire east wing was overhauled, including bedchambers and study nooks she hadn't known existed before, willing themselves through the frozen ground. Hudson's men even managed to recreate the entrance outside of the library, replacing the simple fencing and gates with inlaid stonework and intricate iron scrolling. An outdoor reading room that she took exceptional joy in overseeing, bundled in fur and velvet, lingering to track the line of the thin winter sun and sketch where she wanted the groundskeepers to plant the roses.
"What do you think about a water feature here, in the middle?"
she asked the foreman as she sketched a marble-carved goddess Nehru on the notepad, holding a quill pen aloft, the spray emerging from the stone feather to rain knowledge to the pool below.
"Isn't this just a quick back way into the library?"
he asked, tapping his stubbly chin with his index finger, multiplying hours and men and rupees in his mind as he watched the queen weave ivy around the base of her dream.
"Oh no. Come spring, this will be the best part of the castle,"
she proclaimed.
"I'm going to live out here."
Link held these words, a torn and pasted memory tacked together with her walks past the windows, the hours he watched her tucked into a leather armchair, her face set in the peace of an indulging, contented smile as she spent afternoons either lost in the latest book she'd plucked from the collective whole of the kingdom, or scratching away at a new notebook, untangling her thoughts in notes and pictures, nursing a cup of tea, leaving rings on the table. A new constellation of eights leached into the wood, just like the ones on her desk at home. For one season, having her this close, this safe, it felt like enough. Their lives crystallized into a parallel, two leaves caught in the same downstream, and in the placid sameness of these frosted days, urgency slipped beneath the warming, reassuring novelty of knowing there she was, one pain away, safe. Then suddenly the ground began to crack open, spilling all its chaos of green and blue and birdsong, and it was spring once more.
"Come on, Naburu. There's nothing to be afraid of,"
Zelda chirped into her horse's ear as she whined against the mess of ruins cluttering up the Great Plateau's path. Over the winter, the black, diamond-crowned Gerudo mare, the one she'd first taken on the mining exhibition, had become her default horse. They were well suited, even if she was markedly larger than Storm, the pony she'd left at home. Despite her size, Naburu was still faster than her Hylian counterpart, the one whose head could not be turned if she found a patch of sweetgrass. It was Zelda's own fault. She'd been indulged her entire life. Naburu was trained like a soldier. But even this most obedient of horses bristled at being steered into the ancient, decimated town square.
"She doesn't like ghosts,"
said Audrina from her rust-colored steed. Audrina was an archer from the Verena 12, clean boot girls, Zelda couldn't help remembering now. The cast of guards that followed the queen along on her rides rotated based on who was around at the time, but it was understood that Audrina would always accompany them, and always did. It was an unstated threat. If Zelda ever conjured the audacity to send Naburu flying into Hyrule Field's open pastures, it was Audrina who could bring them both down in a finger snap. There were the other precautions woven into the background of her every move, the minimum pair of arena that traced her from door to door of the castle, her only privacy afforded when she was locked within one particular space. She didn't think about it much, especially now, closing in on a year as the Queen of Hyrule. She knew she was fortunate to have this much latitude at all, breadth won by 100 little compromises, a reward for being such a good girl.
"Whoa, girl!"
Zelda cried out as Naburu bucked back from the broken steps, stumbling backwards toward the crumbling center fountain. She wound her hands quickly around the leather reins, trying to let her body flow along with the frightened horse's panicked movements instead of clamping on and spooking her further. Immediately 3 of the soldiers were off their rides and stacked around them, hushing and murmuring to the pony while yanking Zelda off of her as quickly as possible.
"Are you all right?"
the unit's commander demanded to know.
"Yes, I'm fine, truly,"
Zelda vowed. The woman crossed her arms, sweeping her gaze around the ruins blistering with fresh moss.
This is a holy place,
she declared.
Nabooru is correct. She does not belong here. I can walk the rest of the way myself,
Zelda said.
It's no trouble, if you can keep watch on her.
The soldier considered for a moment, running a schematic of calculations in her mind before announcing.
Audrina, escort Her Highness up to the temple. We'll stay here with the horses. This shouldn't take long,
Zelda said through an apologetic smile, as she retrieved her sketchbook and pencils from the saddlebag, making her way up the path as the archer followed a blink away from sinking an arrow straight to her lungs.
I have another project for you,
Ganondorf had said as the morning breakfast pastries were cleared from their plates, the porcelain cups refilled with the coffee they both took black.
You want to start working on the West Wing?
She asked.
No, this particular work falls outside the boundary of these walls,
he said, inhaling the rich Farron specialty before bringing it to his lips.
It's a place I have an unreasonable affection for, which has, like almost everything else in this accursed land, fallen into disrepair.
Because you've decimated it time and again. A tiny voice clawed from the edges of her mind, that defensiveness she felt over the wreck that was left of Hyrule in the midst of the calamity and the upheaval, the home that had not volunteered its apocalypse. But this was a useless sentiment, and a dangerous one, and she swallowed it up before it could line her face in a frown.
The Temple of Time on the Great Plateau,
he clarified.
I'd like to see it back in its original glory. It would bring back fond memories for me. You know what it was for? Records don't go back that far. I've always wondered. You can tell that it was designed with such detail and reverence. There's a kind of melancholy, too, simply in its nature.
Even in her far-flung reminiscence, before the calamity, the reason for the cathedral's existence had faded away from history. An elaborate testament to the royal family, predating her own by generations. The symbols and prayers carved into the wall had become no more than decorations, their magic spent.
That's of little importance now.
He dismissed her with a wave of his hand. His former lifetimes, rises and falls, were not open to her. His own recollection of her every incarnation was a secret he savored away from her. Above her.
When it's completed, you can transport that intriguing collection of artifacts for the peasants to gawk at anew. A nice peace offering to them, without letting the masses nose unfettered around our own home.
She pressed her nose against Nabooru's own, murmuring assurances to the elegant beast before starting up toward the long-abandoned temple. The stately steeple tower, adorned with inlays of the Triforce at every point, the windows still holding fast to fragments of their original panes. It conjured up images from a gorgeous old art book she'd come across, imagining the rows of windows in their original stained-glass glory, depicting the sages that used to guide the hero's journey. Could they remake them? Perhaps. Audrina's footsteps came to a halt at the vacant temple entrance. The doors rotted away for millennia. Zelda was almost alone. Taking a seat on a dry stone, she watched the pollen and petals drifting in the open air, meandering down like snowfall in the places where sun rays slatted through the departed sections of roof. It seemed almost a shame to patch up this ethereal beauty, she considered as she opened her notebook, counting out the sections they could use to create storytelling glass. She slid a sage green pencil out from the bundle, the shamrock lead hovering over the page. She lingered, her imagination blocked. What history could she possibly tell here? Rauru and Sonia's founding of Hyrule, the imprisoning war, the calamity, the upheaval? This king would object to any and all of these depictions. They did not serve him. Her own work, all that she had done or witnessed in the kingdom, would be blotted. Even she could only exist in this world severely edited. She exhaled, letting her forehead meet the pleasing paper grain and smudge its waiting perfection with her flaking kohl and rouge. Her eyes closed, knowing what Ganondorf actually wanted. Impressive, show-stopping nothingness. She was so tired of counting and measuring her every action, arranging her face and body, of bullying her own heart into feeling grateful. The numbing exhaustion only fueled her hunger for respite. The evenings that blotted out the days, the grateful reprieve from strangling her true nature and will, slipping into nothing but a conduit for pleasure. An endless grind of damnation and atonement, each cycle leaving her ever so slightly as less. Sweet princess. The voice startled Zelda so completely. The pencil leapt out of her hand, landing somewhere amidst the wild grass. More presence than sound, reverberating through her body and yet somehow contained within it. She whipped her head around to the entrance, only seeing half the silhouette of Audrina leaning against the wall, letting her bow hang lazily at her side as she waited for the queen to finish up whatever fool's errand the king had tried to distract her with today. She hadn't heard it. The voice was for Zelda alone. Tentatively, with the timid steps of a fawn in the expanse of a meadow, Zelda crept closer to the towering goddess statue at the far end of the temple. The mother goddess was tall enough to almost reach the ceiling, her eyes closed and hands clasped in eternal prayer. In hundreds of years of turmoil, her peace had not been broken. A ring of much smaller goddesses stood sentinel at her feet, the same ones that oversaw the towns and outposts throughout Hyrule, draped with flower garlands and wreaths by children and elders, the ones with time and heart to tend to such matters. My lovely daughter, Princess Zelda. Zelda's hand flew to her heart, skin that had become markedly cool to the touch. Still, she could feel it beating, hammering as the voice vibrated her to the marrow. How bitterly she had cursed this deity, forsaken her existence, for the idea that it was not possible to know her was so much less crushing than the notion that she was not capable. And yet, this voice was here, calling across from the sacred to the mortal, reaching for her. A vision of falling to her knees. No, not her knees, not her memory, it was. Sweet princess, my heart breaks for you.
My holy mother,
she breathed, scarcely believing.
You're here?
Your dear hero, he suffers as well.
Link,
she murmured, sinking to his knees. She could almost grasp his shoulders, the memory in shape rising in the dew. He was here, begging, for her. You know he still fights for you.
Where? Mother, Hylia, my goddess, where can I find him? Please.
A stillness as the air shifted, the dust and debris suspended and shimmering in the light as if cast in amber. Close.
Please, my goddess, can you tell me?
Is this why you wait, sweet princess? Is this why you have yet to claim your freedom? She stared up, dumbfounded as the voice continued. You have everything you require, my daughter. What was delivered, and what is dormant, that is what will release you.
Mother, I beg you.
She grasped, her nails squelching in the dirt and yielding stone of the ancient carved robes.
Tell me where he is.
What was delivered? What is dormant? It is not a hero that you need, only a hero that you desire. Hyrule waits, sweet princess. The man shepherding daffodils into the urns lining Zelda's new courtyard was familiar. Meta, a villager who sold Link tomato, starts after the first spring swelter. Not just the sweet, thumb-sized cherry variety that could be found growing wild along the riverbanks, but peculiar yellow ones shaped like pears, and a streaked pink, gargantuan one that grew to the size of a fist with a pulp that remained warm, no matter how long it had been brought in from the sun. They'd mash them haphazardly with salt and herbs and toss it all together with pasta noodles, a late-night dinner they split on the Meta's farm was across the bridge from their house. He would know if anyone had been by it, if it had been raided or boarded up, what had become of Storm and Epona. He could effortlessly solve so many of the mysteries that dominated Link's waking thoughts around this single perimeter, bookended by the dock stairs to the north and empty guardhouse to the south. But Meta said nothing, engrossed in his task, alternating the daffodils with sandelians, saying nothing and not so much as acknowledging the 6 giga space just as tidily as the planters. The patrols around the land were easing and it was the castle, rather than the lands around it, where the powers that be felt needed the most watchful eyes. There were more people like Meta coming and going from the palace now, whether lending luxury and talent with fine new kitchen delicacies and ingredients, tidal waves of silk and brocade, and furniture to fill in the empty spaces according to the queen's design. Then there were the other wagons and small barges, the ones that came under cloak of nightfall, tended by hooded riders who kept their deliveries unseen with burlap and blankets, which they scuttled into the castle depths from the docks. There had been no whispers of what they could be, and Link only knew of them from his night patrols around the guard tower, as he watched them ease in, guided by a single, dim torch. The sound of voices rounding the path from beyond the gatehouse spooked the gardener, who wasted no time scuttling his remaining plants and small wheelbarrow of dirt out of view behind the centerpiece marble fountain, and bounding away, most likely to hide in the servants' entry near the kitchen until the threat of seeing any of his loathed patrons had passed.
Why the Temple of Time, though?
Trace's nasally question followed Zelda along with Pen, who held a notepad just like his boss, but with clearly no intention of making use of it, as he, instead, craned his neck to every angle, admiring the fresh plumage of grandeur now set into the castle's side flank. Zelda hadn't been wearing the Verena black since spring had unfurled its longer days and honey-scented air, opting instead for the marvelous hand-painted silk that was the stuff of myth to most Hylians. Link himself had only knew of it from a cursory glimpse within Cece's dress shop, when Zelda had asked to pop in about having some simple new things made.
I've been saving this for a special occasion, something that's going to need to be nothing short of iconic.
The enthusiastic seamstress teased while fishing a gold key from her skirt fold, unlocking the bottom drawer of her armoire. She beckoned Link and Zelda close to glimpse the perfect white silk folded in a tidy square, the silver and blue scales of a snaking dragon swimming through the eternity of sky, as intricate and careful as any painting hanging in the castle museum.
Made from pure lotus thread silk harvested at Lake Floria, woven by hand by the only two women who know how, old sisters who live together on Tuft Mountain. There's a Va in Lorien Village who does the painting, but she's prone to traveling the world, so I'm lucky to get a few yards out of her a year.
She waxed, dining for her lace-gloved hand to ever so slightly brush against her hoarded treasure.
I'm sorry, Cece, you misunderstand,
she said, abruptly standing up from the drawer.
There is no occasion. I just need some new things to wear around here, in the village, or when we're at home, or maybe visiting friends that are a day ride away. But Princess,
Cece protested, her brow furrowing behind her stylishly flared glasses.
You are the occasion.
She murmured some excuse about needing to think about it, not sure after all what she'd need until she went through the dresser. They'd stop back in next time to straighten it out.
I'll get something from the shop in Kakariko next time we go,
she told Link once they'd arrived home.
You know, you want to have something nice like that, you should let her make it for you.
Link nudged.
For what?
She snorted, prying the mud-caked boots from her feet, banging them against the door frame before bringing them over the threshold.
I don't know. A dinner party, maybe? If I showed up at any dinner party wearing that, I'd look insane.
She pointed out.
Insane and totally full of myself. I'm only saying, I know Cece would be over the moon to design for you,
he said, running a bowl of strawberries beneath the streaming sink.
It's overindulgent,
Zelda muttered, retreating to the loft to run through the earth-battered skirts, leggings, and blouses making up her small rotation of clothes.
But then again, I don't have anything here that doesn't look like it was dredged from a cave trove. Catch her next time we're in town,
he said, arranging the fruit around a thick hunk of Hatano cheese, a simple snack they could enjoy outside. The morning had been overcast, and though most of the clouds burned away by afternoon, enough lingered around the mountain peaks to guarantee a monumental sunset.
Then when it's finished, I'll take you out. Out?
She laughed.
Did I miss fine dining coming to Hateno Village? Theater, perhaps. Or maybe you have something more intimate in mind.
She slid her arms around his middle, pressing her nose against his shoulder as he ripped apart crusty bread. Her hair tickled his neck as she leaned in, admiring the assembled treat.
The grand unveiling of the year's first squash blossom, followed by an invitation-only gala in Mayor Reed's toolshed? Leave the specifics to me,
he said, meeting her small hands with their writing calluses and ink stains, spinning her around to pin her against the table, a low kiss lingering as she dipped back, letting him sink to meet her.
I know all the best places.
But they didn't catch Cece, didn't find a hot spot, didn't see the squash blossoms unfurl from the curlicued vines. They watched the sunset over strawberries and cheese, dappling the sky with an ever-shifting symphony of tangerine, fuchsia, and gold. By sunrise, their lives had fractured. And now she approached, draped from the corners of her shoulders to her ankles in the dragon scale silk, waiting in Cece's drawer, cut to hug the curve of Zelda's body with such familiarity. No one else could exist within it, not without the fabric sagging or puckering, lacking the topography of its intended. The painted scales seemed to rise from the queen's very own skin, sliding and rustling as if taking an air. This particular robe was less formal than what she normally wore, younger and lighter, with a thick collar hugging just below her shoulders, plunging deep and flashing the lush rise of her breasts, which faintly quivered with each step toward the patio's iron table and chair. She placed her sketchbook and bundle of pencils atop it, then set her hands patiently in her lap to meet the reporter's questions.
The temple has been abandoned for longer than even you can remember,
Tracy said, reading verbatim from whatever she noted down prior to her audience.
What is the king's interest in seeing it rebuilt now? I can't speak to the reasons behind the Temple of Time specifically, she said in an even tone that concealed her disdain so lightly, the veneer could have been blown off with the force to snuff a candle. But the king has an interest in seeing all of Hyrule reach its potential, whether that's resuscitating a structure's former glory, or pushing its people forward to develop new technologies and solutions, intended to improve everyone's life. A sudden love of addressing destruction, not at all contradictory, Tracy said wryly, her eyes searching for an ally in the queen and running straight into a wall. She cleared her throat, moving on. What can you tell us about the renovations undertaken inside of the castle this winter? I hardly think it's feature-worthy, she said, just opening up some of the windows and archways, especially in the dining hall and chambers. And this pathway here used to be a simple back entrance into the library from the docks. Now it's an extension of the library itself, a place to enjoy working or studying, while soaking up the beauty that is Hyrule in springtime. Does the monarchy require more space? Tracy read from her pad. I hardly think I'd call it more space, she corrected. Hyrule Castle was constructed centuries ago. I can't speak to what was in fashion at the time, but it doesn't seem to have been openness and light. I explained my vision to His Highness, and he agreed that we should align the space with our own preferences. So stiff, every word considered and planned, setting her expression in lines of guarded concentration. The last time he'd watched her sink into this distant mode, it was from 5 paces behind her, watching her defend her Sheikah research to her father, the king, before he cut her off with a wave of his hand, threatening to burn her books if she didn't shelve them herself, ordering her every waking second be dedicated to the pursuit of appeasing goddess Hylia, and receiving her power, the light that prophecy vowed would seal the darkness. Another age spent an arm's length away, a spirit watching her life conducted around her, not yet able to give her a hint that she was not alone. When can our readers expect to catch a glimpse of the new improvements? Tracy went on. I don't think the castle is going to be allowing the general public in any time soon, she said, tipping her head, slightly confused. I believe the king has been quite clear that it's a security concern to have the population coming through the gates on any sort of regular interval. It defeats the purpose of having a stronghold, doesn't it? The library door creaked open, and Ganondorf sauntered down the landing steps, breathing in his small audience. Tracy, pen. He nodded at the newspaper staff, who were suddenly standing with the posture of one about to be drawn and quartered. Already chasing your story. The Queen's only gotten back from the Great Plateau. Just a bit ago. I went up to change first. Zelda filled in. Apologies for the haste, Your Supreme Highness, Tracy
said as Ganondorf took his time in his approach. He looked unchanged from that night in Hatno, save for Zelda's secret stone now set into his breastplate. It hovered just above her braided and pinned-up hair as he stood behind her, his claws squeezing into her bare shoulders. Another key left in Link's maddening reach.
We're up against deadline for tomorrow, unless we want to issue another special edition, and that wreaks havoc on the distribution schedule. Where were you?
He clipped her off. Tracy hummed frantically, scanning her notes.
When are we going to have a look at the new castle improvements? And by we, I mean, how do you want to frame this? I'm afraid I left the Queen out of that conversation,
he said, squeezing her skin tighter, his nails flushing her sensitive skin red. She didn't so much as blink.
I wanted it to be a surprise.
He leaned close to her ear, though he spoke to everyone.
I think we should host a ball. A ball?
Zelda couldn't help the laugh that cracked through her facade. Link hadn't yet started at the Royal Guard Academy, when Hyrule had last hosted a royal ball. Zelda couldn't have been more than a child.
A foreign concept in your era, I'm aware,
he said, a soft snarl, as he smoothed a rogue lock of hair back into place behind Zelda's ear.
But this is a new epoch, isn't it? We won't announce anything until next week, when we've had more time to prepare the details. You should have what you need now, don't you?
He said, sending the two reporters gladly scurrying down into their basement-like hiding place amongst the printing presses.
Thank you,
she groaned, tipping her head back to rest against him, her eyes slipping closed.
I thought they'd never leave. So you agree, then?
A statement inviting no alternatives.
Who are we meant to be hosting? The tribal royalty, the provincial aristocracy, the sages that remain.
He ticked off.
True nobility is in short supply, but I think an occasion like this can begin to fix that. How so? Because some will get in, and most will not.
He smirked.
There will be a run on textiles and jewels, since no one has been invited out in over a century. The elite will see firsthand, and send the message down, that elegance has returned.
His fingers slid along her neck, traveling down the rows of gems like paving stones.
The age of hunting and gathering and surviving between the latest vengeful wrath has ended. Let's send it packing with a toast. What would you like me to do?
She asked reflexively, reaching toward her sketch pad. Before she could grasp the book, he snatched her wrist like a heron fishing in a lake, a fluid, instinctual motion, but sharp, and unexpected enough amidst the serene gurgle of the fountain and buzz of insects, mapping their new garden that had sent the tiniest hairline fracture tremoring behind Zelda's steely gaze. A drop in her jaw, the light confidence of her posture seized, but before she could so much as draw a severe breath, his hand released her, about facing to the knuckles, which he lightly traced up her bare forearm to the silken scales.
Just be your alluring self,
he said, drawing back to stroke her cheek.
You're all they'll want to see, after all. Would you like me to work on a list of guests? I'll let you take a look at everything once it's finalized,
he said.
Is there a theme?
Link swallowed up the chuckle that rose up in his throat. Even now, wading in the constant undercurrent of annihilation, she'd run an autopsy on a surprise. Then,
my queen, your ambivalence cut steep,
he said with a mock pout.
Or has your reign been so blissful, you've scarcely noticed that a year has passed?
A year. The permanence of it, the weight of nights apart in the 100, and the triumph with which he spoke it aloud, impossible to contain.
Everything was so chaotic that day, such a disorganized, undignified spectacle. He
reminisced, conjuring not the invasion he'd led but the liberation he'd composed, broad strokes of false narratives and short memories.
You deserve a true celebration worthy of all you've become, don't you agree?
He hooked his fingers around her elbow, tugging toward the glass library doors.
Come, I've had some plans drawn up already. I'll show you. Did you want to see what I'm thinking for the temple?
She asked, gesturing vaguely toward the work left on the table, the pages beginning to peel open in the breeze.
I'll send someone to get it later,
he said, the patience evaporating quickly from his voice. Dropping her protest, the queen fell in line, yielding to her escort into the palace's confines, her freshened-up prison. Link watched the bright pencil renderings clip past as the pages fanned back and forth, until finally settling in the last half, still blank and crisp with potential. Displayed open to the sun, beckoning for a purpose. The wind shifted slightly, sending a splash of fountain water onto the pristine paper. Coolly, muffling his urgency in a lazy stride, he walked to the table and brushed the drops away, weighing the cover down with one of the stones left over from the former pathway. It wasn't until the next morning, after the dew and the night had their way with the delicate pages, that a servant emerged to ferry the ruined folio out to the trash. End of chapter 2.